You won't believe this. My grandma dropped a bomb, but it was like she was speaking in code. After they scooped up my super talented bro, my parents ghosted this place because apparently I was the dumb one they didn't want around. I'm here all on my own now, and it's like a ghost town. Can you even fathom it? Did my folks just straight up ditch me? My grandma, on the other hand, showered me with crazy love, mouth-watering grub, and the warmest, fuzziest smiles you could ever imagine. I discovered the true joy of being embraced for who I am. Then, after enjoying more than 2 decades of freedom, my parents suddenly reappeared in my life. They showed up after witnessing my success as a respected media researcher, but there was something sinister in their intentions, and they came at me with a sinister grin. I could feel a seething rage building up inside me as I watched their desperate actions, realizing they had brought this upon themselves. Seeing them with those wicked smiles, spewing insincere praises like, "You're incredible," or hysterically ranting about a daughter's duty to assist her parents was so nauseating that it left me speechless. My emotions boiled over, and my thoughts sharpened to a point. These individuals hadn't changed one bit. They think their values are the only ones that matter, using them to excuse excluding others and justifying all sorts of tyranny, without a care for the people they harm. It's laughable, really. Now they come to me solely because they need something. Well, I won't hold back any longer. I've been forging my own path in life, and I can't consider those who neglected me my whole life as family anymore. I feel no connection to them whatsoever. The moment had arrived to finally speak my mind to my parents. I disown any claim to their inheritance and officially declare our estrangement. I am Sarah, a 28-year-old researcher. Ever since I was a child, I adored playing outdoors, sprinting through mud puddles and digging in sand pits until I was completely covered in dirt. It all started when my science teacher began discussing microorganisms. The concept of something that you can't see but is still there totally blew my mind. Even though these things were invisible to our naked eyes, they each had these crazy different looks under a microscope. I was obsessed with uncovering things I'd never seen before. So I begged my parents to buy me a picture book from the store. But guess what? That still didn't cut it. We didn't have a microscope at home, and I couldn't always use one at school. Can you believe the level of disappointment I felt? My teacher started telling us about these incredible microorganisms, like how they chow down on fallen leaves and make their homes in mud. Since leaves in the mud were everywhere, I couldn't resist investigating. So I ended up covered in mud while exploring the fascinating world of these tiny creatures. "Sarah, why do you always mess up your clothes?" my mom would say. "How many times do I have to remind you?" Every time I returned home with my clothes all messed up, my mother would give me a piece of her mind. But you see, I tended to forget about her warnings when I was out playing, especially since she wanted me to embrace more traditionally feminine activities. She'd insist, "You're a girl, so put on a dress. Playing outside is just not something girls should be doing," despite the fact that I love the complete opposite kind of play. That's how I ended up getting scolded by her quite often. My habit of getting completely engrossed in things, to the point where I'd forget everything else, caused issues at school too. During home visits, my teacher would make remarks like, "Sarah often struggles to stay focused in class and can be caught daydreaming frequently. She gets distracted easily and loses her concentration." My mom would give an awkward smile, apologize on my behalf, and then gently say to me, "Let's work hard and study, dear." But as soon as the teacher left, she would grab my arm and unleash a high-pitched tirade. I couldn't help it. I found classes incredibly dull. The lectures were often a confusing jumble, with teachers spewing out information without any rhyme or reason. Just sitting there and listening became mind-numbing, and my thoughts would inevitably drift to more captivating topics. That's how it felt, and it's why my test scores were all over the place. I aced some tests with near-perfect scores while struggling to get even in the 20s on others. My inconsistency made my report card look like a roller coaster ride. At school, the teachers would encourage having interests, even if it meant putting varying levels of effort into them, rather than having no interest at all. But for my parents, having even one subject with less than stellar grades was absolutely unacceptable. They would toss my report card aside in utter disgust, muttering, "A fool has no place in this house." My parents were perpetually bragging about their own achievements. My mom, who taught at a fiercely competitive high school, held her head high for having graduated from a prestigious university with rigorous academic standards. She firmly believed that top-notch grades and getting into a prestigious university were the keys to a successful life. I couldn't help but notice that the people around her were somewhat put off by her unwavering values. It seemed like my mom either didn't notice or simply didn't care, even if someone dared to tell her. In the world today, the prestige of the institution you graduate from holds immense importance. Anyone who doesn't grasp that fact is seen as a sore loser. It might have been easier to handle if my mom had simply been condescending toward others, but she took it a step further and was confrontational with anyone who had a different viewpoint. So, to keep the peace, it was generally best to avoid any kind of conflict. My dad was quite similar. He had graduated from medical school and became a medical researcher, frequently discussing his work at the university hospital and publishing research papers. He held a strong conviction that a person's value was defined by their academic background, and he didn't hesitate to belittle patients and faculty from other departments based on where they had studied. In their eyes, my situation was embarrassingly unacceptable. Unfortunately, I had a brother who was the complete opposite of me. He was the ideal child, always obedient and excelling in school as per our parents' wishes. He enjoyed luxurious, nutrition-focused meals and high-quality clothing as rewards for his achievements. I was the complete opposite. My meals often consisted of leftovers from what my brother and parents had eaten. My clothes were either too small or hand-me-downs from my brother. When I began favoring outdoor activities over indoor ones, the chances of receiving new clothes dwindled significantly. Our parents treated my brother and me differently based on their values. However, I still loved my brother, and he was always kind to me. My brother had a mountain of workbooks and was always stuck at his study desk, as per our parents' demands. However, he still found the time to assist me with my homework and would even share his snacks, knowing that I didn't get any special treats. Both of us silently understood that going against our parents' wishes wasn't the smartest move. The lowest point came when I was 9 years old. With my parents consumed by their own work and my brother's education, they gradually started treating me as if I were completely invisible. My parents simply told me to fend for myself and stopped including me in the meals they prepared for themselves and my brother. They would lock me in my room, claiming it was for doing homework, and only let me out when my brother went to take a bath. Then, I would scrounge for whatever I could find in the refrigerator for food and wear whatever clothes were clean and available. My dirty, muddy clothes were frequently rejected, even when I tried to put them in the laundry, and they'd be left on the floor. Strangely, there would be a tablet placed nearby, playing a video on how to use the washing machine, and I ended up learning how to do my own laundry by watching those videos. I remember feeling a sense of relief when nobody commented on my self-sufficiency. There were days when I didn't see my parents at all. My parents were perpetually absorbed in their work, and on the rare occasions when they had time off, they dedicated it entirely to my brother. Even if we happened to pass each other in the house, there was no eye contact, no response to my attempts at conversation. So, gradually, I stopped trying to engage in conversation, and in response, my parents seemed to ignore my existence even more. They diligently read all the school handouts and provided everything I needed for school, but emotional connection and acknowledgement were sorely lacking. So I simply accepted that this was how things were meant to be. Perhaps my teachers, being colleagues of my mother, never imagined that she would take things to such extremes. There was never any communication or discussion about it. Then one day, when I returned home from school, I discovered a note on the living room table in our empty house. It simply said, "Your brother is going to a new school. We've made this house livable for you." At first, I couldn't grasp the message. I had heard from my brother himself that he might be switching schools, but it didn't seem definite at the time. Little did I know that my parents had already arranged everything. But as I read that note repeatedly, it slowly sank in that I was the one being left behind. My parents were going with my brother, leaving the house for me, and it felt like they were implying that they didn't need me. As I realized this, tears began to stream down my cheeks. I was overwhelmed with sadness, thinking it was all because I wasn't good at studying, because I didn't always obey because I got my clothes dirty. It was heartbreaking because no matter how hard I tried to earn my parents' attention by doing good things and behaving well, it never seemed to matter. Once I did something that they deemed wrong, I became invisible to them. Feeling abandoned was an unbearable sadness. I cried out loud, sobbing as the darkness settled outside, and I grew exhausted from crying. I began to think more clearly again. It was impossible for a 9-year-old child to live alone, even if I had a house. What about food and all the other basic needs? I was completely helpless without any money, and the thought of being all by myself scared me to death. But then, it hit me like a lightning bolt, a memory from my early childhood. I used to visit my grandparents all the time back then. They were my mom's folks, and I'd stay over at their place quite frequently. My grandma, who worked as a caretaker at a foster home, used to take me there with her sometimes. There were many kids my age, and I'm sure we played together. I think it was the year before last. My grandfather passed away, and my grandmother started living alone in that big house. At that time, my mother and grandmother had some kind of falling out, and I stopped going to my grandparents' house or see my grandmother. My grandmother was alone too. With that idea burning in my mind, I embarked on a frantic hunt for my grandmother's contact details. All I could recall was my mother's maiden name, which was also my grandmother's last name. Armed with just that tiny piece of information, I scoured every nook and cranny of the house in a desperate quest. Finally, after a thorough search, I stumbled upon an old handwritten contact book tucked beneath the landline phone. And there it was, my grandmother's last name and her phone number. I had never made a phone call on my own before, but it felt like grasping at a lifeline. I frantically punched the numbers from the contact book, but then I realized I had to lift the receiver for the call to actually go through. After fumbling 3 times, I finally managed to lift the receiver, pressed it to my ear, and dialed the number. I could hear the ringing tone, and after a few rings, the line clicked, silencing the sound. My heart raced as I uttered the words, "Yes, hello, Grandma, it's Sarah." She immediately recognized it was me, and right there on the phone, I managed to explain the situation I was in. Then Grandma said, "I'll come right away," and hung up. Soon after, she came to pick me up in her car when she saw me, as I opened the front door to greet her. She seemed to catch her breath. She must have been shocked by my shabby appearance, but I was too filled with relief to care. There she was, the kind grandmother I remembered right in front of me. I was so happy. I just threw myself into her arms. "Your beautiful hair and your clothes," as she hugged me tightly. Grandma said, stroking my hair. Her touch was so gentle. Those words from my grandma filled me with an overwhelming sense of relief. "Come on, grab what you need, and let's head to my place," she said, giving my back a comforting pat. She was taking me in to live with her. "Yeah, Mom and Dad. They're not coming back, are they?" I hesitated for a brief moment, feeling as though leaving this house would truly cut the last ties with my family, despite all the tears I had shed over feeling abandoned. But still, there was a part of me that was clinging to hope. I'm just a silly girl they didn't want. "Well, isn't that good?" Grandma said. I didn't understand what she meant by that and looked up at her. "You're free now, Sarah. You're free. What do you want to eat? I'll make it. What do you want? What do you want to do?" Free, of course. We'll have some basic rules since we'll be living together, just to make sure neither of us feels bad or has a hard time. Okay? Yeah, apart from that, you're free. Do lots of things you like. Have fun. That's what you can do now. Her words warmed something inside me, being free to have fun. I wasn't quite sure what that life would be like, but an exciting expectation was growing inside me. Afterwards, I moved in with my grandma and started attending a new school. It was a serene, rural area where my grandma resided, and the school was small with only a handful of students. Perhaps because of its size, being the new kid was seen as something novel, and everyone treated me kindly. The teachers were attentive to each student, and I no longer faced the scoldings I'd endured before. "Sarah, you have things you like. That's great. Research the things you're interested in. There should be books in the library. But remember, balance is important. Pay attention in class, finish your homework, then you can do lots of things you like." Everyone accepted me. They helped me when I didn't understand something. They didn't deny who I was. I think before I was never really seen for who I am. But now they just naturally accepted me as I am. So I started to smile a lot more. And near Grandma's house. It was like a treasure trove for me. It was a place where ancient fossils and buried forests have been discovered. And although no major excavation work was being done now, remnants must still be there. Above all, I wondered what kind of microorganisms had lived and worked in that land. I had so many questions and curiosities brewing within me. I wondered about the effects of different layers of the earth and what they were like. Did different creatures inhabit each layer? I was hungry for knowledge. Every day in that rural setting, I'd see people covered in mud, running around and exploring every corner. Once, driven by my curiosity, I started digging and stumbled upon something resembling a fossil, sending my excitement through the roof. Each day was an adventure, brimming with discoveries and a sense of fulfillment. I naturally came to think that this was something I wanted to continue doing for a long time. 20 years have passed since my parents left me behind. Now, at 29, I'm working in a research job specializing in biology raised by my grandmother. After high school, I went on to college for 4 years to earn my bachelor's degree, followed by a master's and doctorate totaling another 4 years. I successfully defended my doctoral thesis and attained my PhD, landing a job at a well-regarded research institute right out of school. Right after taking me in, my grandmother somehow got in touch with my mother and insisted she pay for my education and upbringing. Naturally, my mother was reluctant, but Grandma threatened to consult child services, the police, and hire a lawyer to sue her if she didn't fulfill her obligations. Worried about their reputation, my parents begrudgingly transferred the bare minimum amount of money to my grandmother. Of course, that wasn't enough for tuition, so I used grant-type scholarships and honor student programs to complete my studies as quickly as possible. Now I'm working on things I've always been interested in, like fossil excavation, understanding the conditions and age of the land. My life became incredibly fulfilling. Despite the reputation of research institutes for their demanding hours, often exceeding 100 hours a month, I didn't distinguish between working hours and overtime. I conducted my research driven solely by my insatiable curiosity, using a variety of methods to uncover answers. It felt like there was never enough time for the sheer joy of learning. While some colleagues had left unable to endure this environment, I found the job to be thoroughly enjoyable, devoid of any hardship. Being nicknamed a physical and mental powerhouse at work is something I take as a compliment. Having been denied the chance to do what I wanted and my feelings negated in the past, I relish the opportunity to delve into my interest and make new discoveries in this job. Since childhood, I've been intensely interested in one thing, which often became a target of criticism from adults. But now I can use this trait effectively in my work. My grandmother helped me learn how to manage this trait, turning it into a strength that I could use as my weapon. As a result, I understood how to study efficiently, improving my grades. I did well in my entrance exams and could fully utilize this trait in my research. I thrived on organizing and prioritizing multiple tasks in my mind, methodically tackling each one. The feeling of my brain working at full tilt, almost boiling over as I delved into information and unearthed answers, brought an indescribable pleasure. It was becoming increasingly clear that this job was a perfect fit for me. Notably, I had recently been honored with an award from a prestigious society for my discovery and comprehensive understanding of the unique functions of a rare microorganism I had stumbled upon in the sand samples I analyzed during an overseas fossil excavation. It all started with my curiosity about why this microorganism was present in that particular stratum. As I unraveled the mystery through research, I learned about its critical role in evolution, prompting me to quickly write and submit a paper. This discovery kept me abroad longer than expected, and I got tied up in non-research related meetings and media interviews, consuming extra time. But I managed to return to the States just when I thought I could return to the Institute to continue my other research. I was ordered by the director to take a few days off as a reward to lay my plans. Since these opportunities are rare and there's not much else to do, I decided to visit my grandmother, so I headed straight to her place from the airport. You've been busy again, haven't you? Not really. It's more that the non-work stuff is bothersome. I saw you on TV. That party. You were wearing such a lovely dress. I was just dressed up and made up against my will. You looked like a completely different person than the usual, Sarah. I was just tired. Grandma's pumpkin stew is still the best. That's great to hear. If you want more, feel free to help yourself, my grandma warmly offered. As I arrived at her house, I settled into the cozy living room, savoring her delicious pumpkin stew and a cup of tea. My grandmother still lived alone in that house, and although she was advancing in age, her vitality remained, evident in her dedicated work in the garden. I silently hoped that she would continue to enjoy good health and stay energetic for many more years to come. Just as I was lost in these thoughts, the doorbell rang. Huh? The mail. That's unusual. My grandmother stood up and headed towards the entrance. Since I was little, this area has always been sparsely populated. The neighbors who know each family's composition rarely use the intercom for visits due to their close-knit nature. Even now, the only people who diligently ring the doorbell are delivery personnel. Since my grandmother never uses online shopping, I was wondering what could have been delivered. I could hear the sound of her slippers scraping the floor and the front door opening. I thought Grandma would return immediately after receiving the package. But she didn't come back right away. Instead, there seemed to be some commotion at the entrance. Sensing the uneasy atmosphere, I decided to go to the entrance myself. Ah, Sarah. As I left the living room and peeked down the hallway to the entrance, I heard someone calling my name behind my turning grandmother. At the door stood a man and a woman, and it was the woman who called my name. Sarah, I'm so glad. I wanted to see you. She beckoned for me to approach. Initially, I couldn't recognize them. After all, it had been 20 long years since I had last seen them. The two people before me, desperately calling my name with strained, forced smiles, were my significantly aged father and mother. Why are they here? What do they want? After 20 years of no contact? After they abandoned me 20 years ago? Laura, you and David have no face to show Sarah. My grandmother raised her voice at my mother. Just stay out of it, Mom. Sarah is my daughter. You never acted like a parent. How dare you? Sarah, come here, let's celebrate. You've done well, my parents exclaimed in unison, still yelling, observing my parents' commotion. I realized they knew about my recent award. They probably didn't expect me to be here, but the only connection they had to me was through my grandmother. So they came here. And by a stroke of bad luck, for mere good luck for them, they found me visiting. Keep it down. You're disturbing the neighbors, I stated firmly. And my parents stiffened and closed their mouths. They seemed to be somewhat aware of their absurd behavior. I won't let you inside the house. Just explain briefly why you are here. If you make any more noise or trouble, I'll call the police right away. Now speak when I urge them to talk. My parents exchanged glances, and then they started sharing their story. They explained that things took a turn for my brother after he entered college. He managed to secure a spot at one of the top universities, just as our parents had hoped. However, once he arrived there, he was exposed to a whole new set of values that were different from those instilled by our parents. He was surrounded by brilliant students with strong wills and diverse aspirations, witnessing his peers passionately pursuing a variety of dreams. As a result, my brother began to question the academic elitism he had been raised with and grew to resent our parents' excessive obsession with educational credentials. My brother disappeared during his senior year of college, leaving a note saying, "Don't look for me." He's still missing to this day after being abandoned by my brother, who they had invested so much time, effort, and money in. My parents went on a spending spree in their turmoil. To me, it made no sense that maybe they were trying to fill the void of loneliness with other things. I wanted to say they should have been more concerned about my brother, but I realized once again, these people couldn't possibly have such feelings. Naturally, their savings dwindled, and it impacted their real lives. They started lashing out at others, at their workplaces. My mother, a teacher, was overly strict with her students and excessively interfered with their futures, eventually causing several students to stop attending school. She also harassed and verbally abused younger colleagues, leading to recordings of her actions being submitted to the Education Board, resulting in disciplinary action. Both parents are being threatened with lawsuits by lawyers from both sides. My father to behave similarly. Looking down on colleagues with lower educational backgrounds, he made unbearable remarks and acted high-handedly. Not only that, but he also treated hospital patients in the same manner and even made advances towards female patients he fancied. It appeared that my parents were on the verge of facing legal troubles due to their actions. I sensed that they had pushed their limits without anyone to rein them in. With tears in their eyes, they explained their predicament and then leaned toward me. "Sarah, we want to reunite as a family, supporting each other," they said. "You were truly our daughter all along, and you've done so well." Amazing. You must be famous in your field by now. With fame comes authority. From now on, support each other. What do you mean? That was an unforgivable remark. Support each other now, after all this time. But we're family. I interrupted my parents' words with a question, shocking them. Family. What do you mean by that? What do you mean? We might share genes, but we're not a family, are we? Why would you say that? My mother's voice grew louder, trying to stop me. I even felt a sense of nostalgia in that unchanged voice of hers. And then I realized I'm not afraid of them anymore. Not even a little bit. Also, stop twisting things to your convenience. You're only here because you're facing huge compensations. You can't pay, right? You're relying on me. But is it because my brother is gone and now it's my turn? Or is it because you've run out of money to the point where you have to rely on the daughter you abandoned? As I spoke calmly, my father was speechless that my mother glared at me with wide eyes. "Sarah, how can you say that?" "We're family, and family should support each other. You're just shocked because we haven't seen each other in so long, right?" they said, trying to reassure me. "Don't worry. From now on, we'll live together and we can adapt to each other's pace." But I couldn't bear it any longer. With a firm tone, I immediately responded, "That's a joke. Absolutely not. I refuse. I don't want to talk to you ever again. Please leave." I couldn't fathom the idea of living with them after everything that had transpired. Even as my parents started yelling and screaming, my heart remained cold. "Sarah, how can you talk to your parents like that? Hurry up and pack your things. Take us to your house." My parents' words became increasingly rough, even though I said I didn't want to live together. They intended to barge into my home. It made me chuckle. In fact, it seemed that my expression reflected that sentiment. Somehow I felt a faint smile forming just as you treated me like I'm not your child. I've never thought of you as parents to suddenly be told by strangers that we're a family and should live together is nothing but terrifying. Your child is just your son. I want nothing to do with you from now on. I don't even want to be invited to the funeral. I contemplated. So this is what it means for your blood to boil? My gut felt like it was heating up, and it seemed like my blood pressure was on the rise. However, despite the turmoil in my body, my mind remained surprisingly composed. It was as if a cool breeze was gently wafting through my thoughts. This was something I had contemplated for a long time. Cutting ties might be necessary to navigate potential inheritance issues in the future, but severing the parent-child relationship would be an impossible feat. However, if I cut ties in practice and simply didn't communicate, that should work. Finally, my parents turned red in the face and started yelling, "What are you doing acting on your own? Who do you think paid for everything? Doctors have an obligation to help their parents. Do you understand how incredibly ungrateful you sound?" Once again, my parents began to yell, and I could only sigh. I wondered how I could make them understand. "Do you seriously think that just by giving money, you can call yourselves parents?" My grandmother said in a calm voice. I thought she was absolutely right. To me, those people weren't parents. Being a parent is a fact, isn't it? That's right. It seemed my grandmother's words didn't reach them. They continued to make incomprehensible claims loudly. My grandmother sighed at their persistently loud and incomprehensible arguments and turned on her heel. My parents were still shouting at that moment as some they heard a police siren getting louder and louder. I wondered if there had been an accident, but the car stopped in front of my grandmother's house. Police officers got out of the car, and there was a crowd of people around the patrol car. Even in the peaceful rural setting, if a heated argument like this erupted, the neighbors would soon take notice. It appeared that someone had called the police, mistaking it for a more serious incident. Despite the countryside setting, my parents appeared thoroughly flustered when the police arrived. They wore forced, overly friendly smiles and stuttered in their responses. I calmly explained to the police that my parents had left me behind, taking only my older brother, and that this was the first time I had seen them in 20 years. They said they want to live together. The people around us started to murmur. My parents glared at me, but their response seemed to make the situation more believable. The police officers kept my parents away, and in the meantime, we closed the front door and locked all the doors. As expected, my parents didn't come to the house afterward. I heard from the neighbors that my seemingly nice parents had a conversation with the police for a while, and then they left as if nothing had happened. After that, several days passed, but there was no sign of my parents. It seems that even the neighbors are keeping an eye out, but it seems that the two of them haven't come near this area. Could it be that they just came to visit me as a last resort? I had to return home before the vacation ended, and I had relaxed a little when a visitor came to my grandmother's house again. "Hey, long time no see, Sarah," my big brother greeted me. He had a sun-kissed tan and his hair was long, casually tied up. I recognized him by the smile on his face as he called my name. Standing at the entrance was my brother, who had disappeared some time ago and hadn't been heard from in several years. I led my brother into the living room and sat down to hear the details while reconnecting with various people from his college life. My brother became aware of our parents' abnormality and had been patiently waiting for an opportunity to escape from that house. While working part-time, he had accumulated enough funds, and when the time was right, he left the country. His goal was to see various people and various parts of the world while traveling around the world. He worked locally and he said he took many photos. When he posted those photos on social media, a publishing company contacted him asking if he wanted to open a photography shop. He accepted the offer in exchange for them providing him with photography jobs. That's why he had returned to the States after several years. When I was in Rome, I happened to see you on the news, Sarah. Oh, from when I won the award. Yep, you got it. You talked about Grandma in that interview, remember? My return to the States was driven by a desire to see Grandma, but there was another reason, Sarah. I wanted to find you, my brother declared. His cheerful laughter suddenly gave way to a serious, straightened posture as he looked me in the eyes. Sarah, I'm truly sorry for everything that happened in the past, you know? Why are you saying this all of a sudden? It's not sudden. I've been wanting to apologize to you every time I saw you. My brother wasn't smiling at all. I didn't really think much about it back then when we were living together in that house. We didn't have meals together, and on holidays I was the only one our parents would take out. Even though there was an obvious difference in the clothes we wore, I didn't find it strange. I was just focused on my studies, and during that time I thought we were just normal siblings who played together, he said, furrowing his brows and clenching his hands on his knees, shaking his head. When I mentioned having a sister to the people in my college seminar, sharing stories from our past, their reactions were a mix of surprise and shock. It was at that moment that I fully grasped that you had every right to resent me, my brother admitted. I should have gone to apologize right after I left home. I shouldn't have put it off until now. I'm deeply sorry for leading a carefree life while you were enduring so much hardship. He lowered his gaze. I truly should have gone to apologize as soon as I left home. But I'm sorry I put it off until now. I'm sorry that I thought it was normal for you to live a normal life when you were going through such a hard time. His heartfelt apology. Mimi, consider resenting my brother for the first time. However, I couldn't summon any negative feelings towards him and didn't harbor thoughts like why only me or why just my brother. At that time, I was preoccupied with our parents to the point where those thoughts rarely crossed my mind. I'm not angry and I don't resent you. Back then, you were the only one who really talked to me. I said, and my brother's face contorted in a pained expression upon hearing these words as tears welled up in my brother's eyes. Our grandmother approached with mitt and hands holding a plate. Would you both like to have some candied sweet potatoes? It was my grandmother's homemade candied sweet potatoes, made from the ones she had harvested from her garden and prepared since yesterday. Knowing this, I couldn't help but smile at my grandmother's deliberate attempt to recreate the atmosphere of the past, as if we have returned to those days. Wow, this really takes me back. I've been craving these for ages, my brother exclaimed. Yeah, Grandma's candied sweet potatoes are just the best, aren't they? I adored them when I was a kid. I know, I replied. Please help yourself to as many as you'd like. Let's savor them together. We sat across from each other at the table, sharing the same dish after such a long time. It was a heartwarming moment of connection. Just that simple act brought tears to our eyes. Despite the slightly salty taste, it was a precious moment. Afterward, I learned that our parents had to bear a significant amount of compensation and had further scandals that made headlines, ultimately losing their jobs. Currently, they seem to be living a modest life, working alongside people they once looked down upon due to their lower educational backgrounds. They had to humble themselves before younger supervisors with only high school diplomas. It must have been a humiliating experience, but I believed it was a necessary lesson for them. My brother and I, who had been separated for 20 years, began to frequently communicate, share meals, and visit our grandmother's house together. I was truly happy to spend time with my brother as a family, grateful for the moments we shared with our grandmother. My brother and I felt content in both my personal and public life.